The biggest topic that leads to the most fights in relationships is money. We don't know how to talk about money. Between the two of us, racked up over $100,000 in consumer debt. He was working overtime because he had to for us to be able to pay our bills each month. What are we doing wrong, and what do we need to do to move forward to make sure that our family can stay resilient and have a successful future?
It's very, very difficult for you to have everything that you want. If you want to do that, it's going to come at a huge cost somewhere.
Personal finances are a beast. Most of it has to do with our behaviors and our mindset around it. The only person who can take control of your finances is you. Nobody else is going to come along to save you.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning back in to another episode of Real Talks on the Rocks. I'm really excited about this episode. As you know, this show is all about taking control of your finances, your fitness, and your overall mental health. And one of the areas of that I haven't talked about enough that I really want to talk about is finances. Finances for people in my generation, 35, 45 years old. This is the time in our life where we start thinking about retirement. Some of us start looking at our debt and saying, that's a lot, and I really don't know how to address this. And some of us just need help planning for the future, paying off student debt, and we really have no clue how to do it. And it's a big thing with millennials, especially here in Silicon Valley, where while salaries are high, the debt is also high, and so is the cost of living. So things have a weird way of balancing out that. But I'm excited to bring you a guest that specializes in financial coaching for law enforcement, but she's got an incredible background, an incredible story for how she got there. And she's really working hard to help people of our generation get our money together, think about what's important and how you can really plan for a future where you can actually enjoy your family and not have to worry so much about paying off debt into your 60s or 70s or even working that late. So I'm excited to have Rebecca Jameson on the show. And Rebecca is a certified financial coach with Priority One Financial Coaching. It's an online financial area where it's geared towards law enforcement, but she does help clients all around the country work on their finances and get to a position where they can enjoy a good life free of debt as much as possible. So Rebecca, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mike. I'm super excited to be here.
It's awesome to have you on. And again, with your background and with what you specialize in, obviously it resonates more with me being in the law enforcement community. And I have a lot of friends in the industry where these questions about money and finances and how to pay things off and what to invest in, it can be over people's heads like you wouldn't believe. But I'm excited that we have somebody who can help, who can talk to us and relate to us in terms of getting our financial planning in the direction we want it to go. And so really fast, why don't you give me a little bit of a background of who you are, how you got into this spot, and we'll go right from there.
Absolutely. Yes. So I am the wife of a law enforcement officer here in California. We've been together for about 7 years, married for 5. We have 2 daughters, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And about 6 months into my pregnancy with our second daughter, we took a really hard look at what we were doing in terms of our spending. My husband was on graveyards at that point for about a year. And we reached the point where we were looking at our bank account, and it seemed like no matter how much overtime he worked, we still had the same amount of money in our bank account at the end of each pay period. And it wasn't much. So we knew that we were doing something wrong. And so we started to have that hard conversation about, what are we doing wrong and what do we need to do to move forward to make sure that our family can stay resilient and have a successful future, because at the rate we were going, it wasn't sustainable. And so we kind of dived into, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dave Ramsey.
Yes.
So we went into the baby steps, and which really helped us out. It was a great foundation model for us because we had no idea where to start. It was kind of just walking in, with a blindfold on because we didn't know what to do. And so we used the baby steps as our foundation. And that first time that we sat down and decided we were going to list out all of our debts and start figuring out our debt payoff plan, we realized at the time that we had, between the two of us, racked up over $100,000 in consumer debt. And it was pretty jarring.
Is that just credit cards or that's student loans?
Credit cards, student loans, furniture, cars, appliances, anything that you could have a line of credit out for. I feel like we had a line of credit out for it. So we instantly knew that at this point, he was working overtime because he had to for us to be able to pay our bills each month. And we did not want that to be our future. Because again, I was pregnant at the time. I was 6 months pregnant. We had a 2-year-old running around, and we wanted him to be home to enjoy time as a family and make sure that he was around to watch our daughters grow. And so we decided, hey, we just have to be really honest with ourselves. Like, we've messed up, but let's figure out a plan to move forward. And that's essentially what we did. And we started with the baby steps, quickly realized that, and I'm not going to say it's just because he's law enforcement. There are law enforcement officers that have gone through the baby steps, are successful with the baby steps. More power to them. We did not want to feel guilty for going on dates. We did not want to feel guilty for going out to eat. We did not want to feel guilty for going on vacation and so on and so forth. We wanted to figure out a way where we could be intentional with our money while still paying off our obligations and getting ourselves to a point where my husband no longer had to work that overtime. And that's basically what we spent the past 2.5, almost 3 years doing. And by July 2024, we will be completely consumer debt free, besides our mortgage.
Wow. And that started when?
It was the summer of 2022.
So basically 2 years, and you
21. I'm sorry, 21.
Okay, 3 years. Still 3 years, and you hunkered down for 3 years, and in the next few months, pretty much all debt is going to be gone.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And there's so many things there to unpack. One of the things that I wanted to talk about first was, you mentioned the whole Dave Ramsey thing. He can be controversial for a lot of people because his way of managing money isn't for everybody. There's two ways that I see it. There's the pay off the debt model, and then there's leveraging debt. And if you don't understand both of them, it's easy to get confused because you might hear someone say you're supposed to pay off the house because you're going to, be financially free. Then you'll hear somebody else say, well, why would you do that when you have a low interest mortgage? That money that you could otherwise pay the house, go invest it somewhere else because then you can make more money down the line. And it starts to confuse people because, well, you just said I should pay this off over here, but then he's saying if I do it this way, I'll make more money. So what do I do? And people get confused, and then it's just too much for me to think about. I'm just not going to worry about it. I do think that for the majority of people, that paying off the debt is probably the best answer for them, for most of your average Americans, because unless you want to live that millionaire lifestyle and enjoy all the problems that come with it, it's not so much something that you want to get into when it comes to leveraging debt. Because when you get to a certain age, this is a lot to pay off. It's a lot to burden. But again, that's just one thing that I see from his program there that I think works for a lot of people. But if you don't know the other side of it, it can confuse some more too.
Right. So really when it comes to debt is you have to learn to be intentional. You mentioned, leveraging debt. That is a more sophisticated way to look at money. And if you can't manage the debt that you currently have, you're not ready to leverage debt, period. It's just, you're not going to be able to do it. You're just going to wind up in credit card debt and personal loan debt and things like that. And that's just not leveraging debt. You should only learn how to do that when you've already paid off all of your debt, period. Not including your mortgage.
Getting back to law enforcement, you mentioned about the overtime that a lot of us end up working. Now, in the Bay Area, because of the shortage of staffing for many law enforcement agencies, there's a lot of overtime that's being worked because there's no other choice. There's nobody else to work it. But for some people, it's, I like money. I want to buy that big truck or that nice boat. I want to have things that I never had growing up. And this is the most zeros I've seen on my paycheck since or ever. And I never thought I would see that. And so many of us get caught up into that. And then with the way interest rates are now, how expensive it is to buy a car, own a car, gasoline, commuting, all these things add up. And then some of us don't see it until it's way too late in the end. Talk about some of the specific experiences that caught your guys' attention where you said, this is not something that's sustainable for us. This is where pretty much we can't do this anymore.
What it boils down to is being intentional with how you want to spend your money. And really think about when you are working overtime, that it can lead to you spending more money on things that you wouldn't normally spend money on. And the reason being is because now this is not just particular for law enforcement, but that's just because that's what we're talking about right now. There are many jobs that are high stress, many jobs that have work long hours and things like that. But when you are in a high stress job like law enforcement, you have the stress hormone cortisol pumping through your blood for long periods of time. And what happens when you have cortisol coursing through your body and you don't regulate your nervous system, it actually inhibits your prefrontal cortex, which then triggers the reward center of your brain. And so what happens when that reward center of your brain is triggered? You start looking for things to make that reward center happy, right? Whether it's going out and buying things, whether it's, substance abuse, drugs and alcohol and things like that. But for the most part, anything that we do to go along with that reward center activation probably costs money. And so we go out and we spend money as a way to make ourselves feel better for that trigger in our brain. And that can happen even if you're not working overtime, but particularly for those who are working overtime, because you're not allowing yourself that time to decompress. You're not giving yourself that day off to rest and for your body to regulate. And so you're going to be more triggered to make these purchases that are mostly unintentional. If you were of sound body and mind and were to make this decision, not on impulse, would you make that decision to spend, $60,000, $70,000 on a truck?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I can't believe how much these vehicles cost, and like, how are you guys paying for that? And what's really weird is that we live in Silicon Valley. So that Toyota Tundra special edition that costs $70,000, it's the same price if you live in Tennessee or you live in Michigan, where you don't earn as much money in these same jobs. So I can only imagine what some people in other parts of the country are dealing with the same type of expenses. Let's start from the very beginning, because I want to give people a framework of how we kind of got here to begin with. What type of expenses do people have today when we have, for the most part, two people in the household working and bringing dual incomes in, that we didn't have back in the day when it was usually mom and dad? The dad was out working and mom was staying home with the kids, raising them. Things seemed to work out financially as far as we knew it. So talk about some of the things that we've incurred today's day and age that our parents didn't have, which means they don't have the right advice to give us for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, subscriptions, memberships, all of that. You've got a TV subscription for every media outlet now, right? And we don't know. We feel like we have to have all of them because otherwise we're going to miss out on something. And so you have all of these subscriptions, all of these streaming services. Everything nowadays has an app associated to it, and then so. For my husband and I, when we really sat down and took a look at our finances, and, I'm going to use the B word, a budget. We got ourselves on a budget. And I know a lot of people don't like that term, but, and usually what I work on with my clients, I call it a spending plan, because it gives it that illusion of having a little bit more freedom with your money. But when we sat down and we did a budget, and we started really categorizing all of our spending, because that was the first step, is we had to figure out where was our money going. We had no idea. We knew we made it, and we made a lot of it, but it was all gone at the end of the pay period. So where was that money going? Debt was a big part of it, but other things, eating out, we started this journey and we were it was towards the tail end of COVID, right? But what happened during COVID? We started ordering to our doorstep, DoorDash, Uber Eats, right? And in the beginning, it was cost effective, and because it was new, not a lot of people were utilizing it. But then by the end, a $10, $15 meal all of a sudden was costing you $30 to get it delivered to your doorstep. And so when we started doing like a line item of all of our expenses at that time, and again, this is along with all of our debt payments that we were making each month, $1,000 towards eating out is what we were spending.
For a family of four?
For a family of four, but we had two babies, so that doesn't count. It was really for two of us.
Got it. Fair enough.
Yeah, we had our kids barely ate. So but I think we do that. It's a lot of convenience buys, right? We do a lot of things nowadays to make our lives easier because we are so busy. And when we are so busy and we don't have the time to think, then we're not making intentional decisions. And that's what leads to credit card bills. And that's what leads to, all of this other debt, car payments and things like that, because we're not thinking about what we're buying it. we just have that feeling in the moment of like, I need this. And if we just were to pause and take a second and think about what it is we're really trying to achieve, instead of just this quick hit of dopamine in the moment, it feels so good to get that Starbucks through the drive-thru, right? It feels so good. I earned this Starbucks. But really, like a Starbucks every day, what you want your life to be, a Starbucks every day? I work with my clients to think bigger. Okay, think bigger than just what your day-to-day life is. Like, what do you really want your life to look like?
So when your clients come to you, because it's a big step to go to a financial planner, most of us kind of, I don't want to talk about this. I'll wait till later. So they're coming to you for a reason. Is there a common theme that you're seeing? This is the one area where they've hit, the wall that they've hit that said, I need to work on this because it's not looking good for my future. Do you see a common theme with that?
I've had quite a few clients come to me like literally on the verge of divorce. And that is a big thing. Our divorce rate in this country is, what is it, like it's over 50% now, I think.
Depending on how you look at the data, it's about 50%.
Yeah. And one of the attributing factors to it, aside from, infidelity, is finances. It's because we don't know how to talk about it. That is the biggest thing, the biggest topic that leads to the most fights in relationships is money. We don't know how to talk about money. And for most of the time, what it boils down to is, one, we don't know how to manage our money, by ourselves. So it makes it even more confusing when you're trying to manage money as a couple, when you yourself don't already know. There's a lot of shame that comes along with it. If you are personally carrying around debt, or, you make money, but you don't know how to save, things like that. And so oftentimes we already have those triggers, those buttons that are easily pushed. So when the topic of money comes up, it automatically escalates into an argument. And so as a financial coach, the numbers are going to be what the numbers are going to be. And there's a way to work within, the amount of money that you make and streamline your spending so you're not overspending. But the truth of the matter is, a majority of it is your behaviors and your relationship with money.
Okay, so that's what they're coming to you for. Say, hey, we're on the brink of divorce and we realize it's money and we are not on the same page with it. Is that generally because somebody is spending more than the other person? Is it because they both don't understand how they got to this spot? Like, for example, they needed 2 cars. You work over there, I work over there, we need our own car. Oh, wait, we didn't think about how much gas was going to be. We didn't think about the insurance payments because those rates are going up. We didn't think about how if we do that, then we can't pay for X, Y, and Z. Is that sort of a common thing with that snowball effect?
Yes, because we're not paying attention to how our lifestyle increases in conjunction with how much we're getting paid. A lot of people have this feeling, because we felt it too. It's like, oh, well, when he gets that next pay raise, things are going to settle down, things are going to get better. But the problem is you can't have a good relationship, or you can't have more of something that you don't have a good relationship with, right? So if you don't have a good relationship with your money, it doesn't matter how much more you make, it's not going to be enough. You have to get to the point where you are managing your relationship and actually have a positive relationship with the money that you are currently making and managing it effectively. So that way, when you do have more, it feels like you have more.
Gotcha. Okay. So when you talk to your clients, what's the first step that you talk to them? What's the first thing that you bring up? Like, all right, here's the deal.
So generally what I do is I have a free 30-minute consultation. And first things first is I want to make sure that we jive, that we, number one, that the problem that they have, that I can help them with. Because if they're coming to me for investment advice, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not going to tell you which stocks to buy. I can educate you on what it means to be an investor. I can talk to you about compound interest and teach you how that works and how you can utilize that to catapult you into the next stage of your life. But I'm not going to tell you, oh, go buy this stock and go, over here and buy this stock. And that's not what. So if that's what somebody wants, I will refer them to somebody else. But first and foremost is what I want to know is, number one, what are your pain points with money? And so we'll talk about that. And then from there, I usually, if it's something that I can help them with, then I refer them to what is called my discovery session. And my discovery session is a 2-hour deep dive into where they are currently financially. And we make a little like game plan or at least a vision of, okay, I'm here, but I want to be here. And then within that 2-hour session, we start to make that roadmap for them to get from point A to point B. And usually, most of the time, that includes some type of debt payoff plan. It includes some type of strategy for saving money because, you know, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but my relationship growing up with having a savings account, it's like I knew I should have a savings account. And I always tried to keep money in my savings, but I didn't have a plan for it. So it always just ended up using it to pay for things that I didn't need to use it for. So I always work on a saving strategy for my clients, because that is the one thing that is most overlooked when it comes to managing our money, is just setting up an emergency fund. So money that is set aside, that is only used for when those emergencies come up. And even things like Christmas, you know, setting money aside for Christmas. It's so simple. We all know that Christmas comes the same time every year, but for some reason it always sneaks up on us. We're always thinking that like, I wish I would have saved money each month for Christmas, but it just snuck up on me. And now I got to scramble to work a bunch of overtime so we can fund Christmas. But the thing is like Christmas, it's the same time every year. We know it's going to happen. We just don't have a plan for it. And so that's what I work with my clients on, is creating those plans for those things that you know are going to happen. Mm-hmm. So when they do happen, you're prepared.
You know, this is, it's, you know, and I can talk about my own experience with this too, is that growing up, you know, you just knew, or I just knew about, okay, your parents say save money. What does save money mean? Just open up a savings account at the local bank and just put some money in there. And that's something that worked for them. And my grandparents' generation was just, you just save money. And what you don't know when you're 16 or 17 or 18 is that strategy may have worked back then because the whole environment was different. It was, you know, two parents, but one parent, usually the husband, was out working, the mom stayed home to take care of the kids. Interest rates were totally different. You could put money in a savings account and the interest rates at the times meant, okay, you could actually make a good return on that, compared to today where most savings accounts are 0.05 or something ridiculously small like that. And most people would live off of the equity of their home and would retire on a pension or whatever from whatever job that they had. And now you don't want to say this in the wrong way, but for many of them, it was also, I'm going to kind of assume my kids will be there to take care of me. So we get married, we have the kids. I, as the husband, go work for 30 years at the phone company, whatever. I know when I retire, I'm going to get that gold watch. And when I retire, the house will also be paid off at the same time. And my kids will be out and about having their own family. So me and my wife could survive on my pension. The house is paid off and we have equity in the house to enjoy ourselves with. And then when we get too old, the kids are going to take care of us. That's almost to the point of the financial strategy of people in my mom's generation, my grandparents' generation around here. But then when you try to teach it to us, it just, things didn't work out the same way. And a lot of dynamics changed. It's a lot of women were getting jobs, getting more educated. So there's a lot more people in the workforce than there ever was in my dad's generation. All the manual labor jobs went away. They went overseas, or then now in today's day and age, they're being supplanted by AI. It's a different environment now for people to deal with and financially than what it ever was for our parents. So when you go, for me, sometimes you go talk to my mom and about finances and it doesn't quite click because she just grew up in a different time and had a different understanding of how to budget money forward. And for me, I think it changes a lot of the main decisions that people in my generation have to make. We kind of sort of want that house with the car and the family and everything that our parents had. But to make it work around here, usually it means both people have to go work. San Mateo County, this was last year, I think the median household income that's needed to afford a home there is about $350,000. So your household has to bring in $350,000 just to afford something that was built in 1970 that probably hasn't had any work done. And you want to have two kids and you want to have two cars. Okay, this is about how much you have to bring in. Well, even with tech salaries, to have one person make that much is asking a lot, even around here. So both people have to work, which creates more problems in the house because who's watching the kids? You're gonna pay for a nanny, or are you gonna have somebody like your mom or your grandma live with you? So now you have somebody else living in your house taking care of your kids, which causes another point of stress. And then it's okay, well, all these expenses are adding up and everything just seems to be getting more expensive. So we have to work more. And the more you work, the less time you spend with each other, the less time you spend with your family, and the less time you enjoy your life. And then you look back and say, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was supposed to be. I thought if I made this much money, I was going to be set and golden. And then all these expenses come up. And it's a reality that a lot of us are facing. And it's causing many of us to say, I have to pick and choose what I want. Maybe I can't own the home of my dreams here in the Bay Area because it's just too expensive. Doesn't mean I can't own it somewhere else, maybe as an investment property, but I can't buy the house in the neighborhood that I grew up in or a neighborhood that I thought I envisioned living in. Maybe it means instead of buying that new car, I buy the used car. Maybe instead of 2 cars, it's 1 car. Maybe instead of 1 kid, it's 0 kids. I mean, all these are decisions that we're having to make now. And I've seen people in my part of the generation, the 35 to 45-year-olds that they'll never say it directly, but they're realizing I made all those choices based on my parents' lifestyle. And now I'm in this position financially where I can't afford this. You know, had I known this 10 years ago, I would have said, maybe I don't need that brand new Mercedes. Maybe I don't need to buy that house. I could have bought that house that was cheaper, even though it was not in the most desirable neighborhood, but it was cheaper. And now I'm in a position now where I can't take any of that stuff back. I have to live with it. I own it. And I'm in over my head, which causes some people in my industry to say, well, I have to work all this overtime because there's no other choice. I got bills to pay, mouths to feed. And I'm just accepting the fact that I'm not going to be financially stable, that I'll just have to keep working until I can't work anymore. And it's a reality that a lot of us are facing now. And it's really hard because what do you tell people to do? Do you tell them to turn in that car and get a used Honda Civic from 1996? Do you tell them, okay, maybe your kids can't go to private school, have them go to public school? Do you downsize the house? Like, how do you have these conversations? I'm sure you've had this with a lot of your clients.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And, you know, that's the hard thing about money is we have been told these stories over and over and over again, right? From the time that you are in high school and you got to apply to that college and you got to go to college so you can get yourself a good job, and you got to get yourself a good job so you can get that house with the white picket fence, and you got to get that house with the white picket fence so your family can live there and be safe and you can raise your kids, you can live this quote unquote American dream that doesn't exist anymore. I'm going to be super controversial right now. And what I'm about to say is your dream doesn't have to look like that. But we're told that that's what it's supposed to look like. A house is not necessarily a good investment. Your personal residence is not a sound investment avenue. Most of us think it is, but the truth of the matter is, so take our home, for example. We bought our house 5 years ago, $325,000, little 1,200 square foot home. By the time we pay it off, we'll pay over $600,000 with interest. We're paying almost double if we were to extend out and pay the 30-year mortgage. That's not an investment. Now, we love our home. I wouldn't trade it for a second. Our home is where our babies grew up. It's where they took their first steps. I love our home. But it's not just that compound, or it's not just that interest. It's not compound interest. It's not that interest that we're paying. It's also because our house was built in the 60s. You alluded to the old home. Our house was built in the 60s. Cast iron piping. We just replaced 13 feet of cast iron piping underneath our home last year after I left my full-time job. I left my full-time job in February of 2023, and I talked to my clients, and this is exactly why I make sure my clients start setting up an emergency fund. I left my 15-year career. I was net taking home almost $6,000 a month. And I left it because I love what I do as a financial coach, and I want to help more people become successful with their money. What happened a month later, after we had just gotten used to the fact that we were now living on one income? We had to replace 13 feet of piping underneath our home. Our back fence blew down because a storm came through and So now we were looking out our backyard into our neighbor's backyard. My husband needed new tires on his car. And there was one more thing that happened. I can't think of it. But literally we have 4 things happen within the span of 3 weeks that depleted our emergency fund. But we had an emergency fund. It was there and it did its purpose. And then once we got through it, so it took a stressful situation. So to most people, that would be the most stressful period to go through. When you know you are short, you're down one income, and you have all of these things happen at once. But because we had a plan ahead of time, we knew eventually at some point we were going to have some type of thing go on. But that's the thing with home ownership, right? Is you have to pay for all these things. There's no landlord that's going to come in and fix the fence or repair the piping. It's all on you, unless you have a home warranty. But our home warranty was crap because our house was so old. So, but my point being is we have to start really thinking about what we want as individuals or as couples, as a family. What do we want out of life? What do we want it to look like? Not what it should look like. Not what everybody else tells us it should look like. But what do we want?
That statement you made about the home and what you bought it for and what you're going to pay in, I think is going to floor a lot of people when they look at the numbers, because that's probably the same almost everywhere in the country. You buy a home for this much, and what do most people think? They look at the equity. If I buy it today, in 20 years, if I buy it today for $500,000, in 20 years, it should be at least $800,000. So I'm going to make $300,000 on the home. Therefore, it's a good investment. But that's what people see. But then the other side of it, they know deep down there's going to be home maintenance, there's insurance, there's always something that's going to go wrong with the house. But because you can't see it, you can't quantify what that number is going to look like. So how did you come up with the number of, you bought it at 350,000, correct? Or 325?
325, yeah.
And how did you come up with 600,000? How did you plan for this much in expenses that are going to end up saying, hey, by the time we leave this home, this is how much we're going to spend?
Well, we didn't plan for it. We just looked at our amortization schedule that they give you with your mortgage. And at the time when we weren't paying attention to that. When we got our house, we bought a house really that we probably, there were things that came up after we bought the house that cost us money within months. Within the first year, we were forking over cash to repair things in our home. And so, but we weren't really doing much with our finance at that point. We were just doing, I think what most people do is we're supposed to buy a house, you get married. I was pregnant at the time, we need a home we're not going to be renting forever. And that was just our mindset.
And this is what, early 30s?
Yeah, we were mid 30s. Yeah. So okay. My husband and I got married. I think I was 33 and he was 35.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, but we were just doing what everybody said we should be doing. We probably wouldn't have changed it, but we didn't look at the numbers then. I didn't look at those numbers until we started really getting deep into our finances. It's oh, okay, well, what does that look like? But, because the more I read and listen to podcasts and things like that, they're talking about how your personal residence is not an investment. It's not an investment. And I'm like, well, what does that even mean? And then sure enough, I look and I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, because we basically pay for double of what the original price tag was. Now, if you factor in, how much real estate has grown, especially here in California, might our home I don't know that our home's going to get up to a 600,000 figure, within the next 20 years. It might, I don't know, but I'm not counting on it. I'm going to put other provisions in place, because even if our house does, get to the point where it's worth $600,000, we're still living in it. Mm-hmm. We don't get that money till we sell it. And where are you going to go when you sell it? To a bigger home?
Yeah.
Smaller home? What are you going to do? You're going to downsize or
move out of state or something?
Yeah, exactly. And so, there is some potential there here in California, but the truth of the matter is the way that that the prices for housing is right now, it's not realistic, unfortunately. You have to start early saving. I'm talking, if you are early 20s, is start saving for that first home at that point. Because, now our home, I think it's over 400,000, I think is what it's worth now. But like, let's say if we were to go buy our home right now, yes, you can get zero down. I wouldn't recommend that. That's what we did, but I would never recommend anybody to go zero down on their home. Like, put a down payment on your home. But usually that's going to be 20%. So that's for our home. So 10% would be 40 grand.
65,000 you need almost.
Yeah. So like, that's a lot. That's a good chunk of change, right? It's going to take you at least 10 years to save that up, probably, unless you really pinch some pennies.
I mean, imagine Silicon Valley County, Santa Clara, San Francisco, San Mateo. Right. You're talking about $1 million plus. So you need at least 200,000 in the bank. And how many of us have that ready to go, saying, I'm ready to go buy that home? And then even if you do have the 200 grand, then wait, what's the best thing I could do with this money so I can plan for long-term thing? And then is buying a home the best thing? Period, A. And then B, especially if you don't want kids, it's like, well, then why do you need that home? You could put that money somewhere else into a different investment. Yeah, this whole home thing, and I get why people say it, because it just, at the very least, it makes you feel like, okay, I own this house. Therefore, because I own it, I made something, I made something on myself. I'm going to be okay. They can never take it away from me. Well, if I don't pay the mortgage, they can. But once I own it, they can't take it away from me. And I'll always have that in the back. So I think that sense of security that people really hold on to, saying this is why I need to buy a house. And that if you're renting, you're throwing money away, because that's the mindset. Even though the numbers don't really pan out that way, especially around here, like some of the more wealthier people probably rent their home here and they own something in a different state. And that's how they're making their money. Yeah, we can keep going on about the home thing, because it's one of the biggest, I'm gonna say lies, but the biggest misconception is that you need to own your home in order to be wealthy and to be well off, when really that is not the case. Sometimes it's going to be a lot better for people to rent, especially when you're living in a high cost of living area like San Francisco, where everything is just ridiculously overpriced, because that's the nature of the market. This is where all the jobs came from. Well, they're leaving now, but this is where a lot of the jobs came from for a long time with tech. Another big expense that people tell me about is student loan debt. Now, when I graduated college in 2005, student loan debt wasn't a thing. I mean, I got really lucky that I went to a state university, so you're just paying, whatever college, whatever the scale was at the time. It was reasonable. Yeah, I had to work a part-time job, and yes, I had help from my aunts who were thankfully they created a small fund for me when I was born. I think the 503c or was that what it called?
No, the 529.
529, yes. So I had that ready for me to go to college, and there wasn't much money in there compared to today's terms, but it was plenty for me to pay for my college credits and my books. And I just lived at home, and I graduated in 4 years. Lucky for me, but the people don't have the luxury anymore. Going to any university, even a state university, I mean, you're looking at $30,000-$40,000 on the low end. And if you want to go to med school or something, you're talking about $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in debt, or in student fees you're going to have to pay, which means you're probably going to have to take that much money out in debt. And people do it because you get hung up on this, I need a degree in whatever field, because that is going to allow me the ticket that I need to go get that big paying job at whatever law firm or Google or Wall Street, whatever it is. So I need that before I can go over there. So I'll take that $200,000 on of debt, because it's going to pay for itself down the line. Now, student loan debt is interesting. If people don't know this, you cannot declare bankruptcy on student loan debt. Once you take out the funds for student loan, you own that. So it doesn't matter how much money you're making. Uncle Sam's going to want his money back for getting you to go to college. So since you can't get rid of that, it's going to always be there for you. And I see a mindset with some people my generation, which is, I got fill in the blank amount of student loan debt. I'm never going to pay it off. I'll just keep paying the minimum, and then maybe one day it'll just magically go away. And then I'll just deal with it whenever, or maybe, I'll pass on, and it's someone could just write it off for me. But then it's going to affect you when you want to go and try and get a loan for something else, because now you own all that debt. And I think it's affecting the way people are thinking about going to college nowadays, which is it even worth it to go to college? Because nowadays you can get skilled in so many trades like coding and whatnot without going and get a degree that will pay for itself in of its own. Talk about some of your, without naming names, talk about some of your client experiences with student loan debt and how that's affected them going forward, and what your own opinion of that is.
Yeah, and it's funny because especially the past couple of years with all this talk about, the government forgiving student loans and blah, 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 blah. I have noticed that most people that have student debt, they just kind of push it aside. Like, it's not, they don't view it as lumped in with the rest of their debt. It's like, it's kind of an afterthought. And so, and I don't know if it's because there's been all of this talk about student loan forgiveness, but if I can tell anybody anything, and if you take anything away from this podcast episode, is like, do not rely on the government to do anything for you financially, period. They're there for their own interest, okay? They're not going to help you out. They might help out a little bit, but the only person who can take control of your finances is you. Nobody else is going to come along to save you, unfortunately. So the best course of action is to tackle it hard as soon as you can. And, you know, get out of that mindset of just paying the minimums for the rest of your life. It really, and there is something really empowering too, when you can sit there and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I did this. I knowingly took out this loan. And now I will say student loans, they are predatory. The compound interest that happens on student loans is disgusting. And the fact that you are having 18, 19-year-olds sign on this dotted line who have no concept of personal finance because it's not taught in our schools, and they are tied to this for the rest of their life, is predatory and disgusting, and I think it needs to stop. So I will say that. But if you signed on that dotted line, like you said, it's your obligation. You know, you have to make the choice to do something about it. And it is empowering to sit there and say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I messed up. Yeah, I regret this. And I wish that I would have made a better decision. But I'm going to correct it now so my future self doesn't look back and wish that I did something when I could.
You know what? The other thing about that too that I was realizing as you were speaking about all that is how that just student loan, since we're on the topic of student loans, how that is impacting people of my generation when we have kids, or people my age who are having kids who are saying, you know what, little junior, I will put something away in case you want to go to college, but should you ever have to spend more on this, I don't want you taking out student loan debt. In fact, you know, think twice about, do you need this degree? Especially if you're, no offense to anybody who's an art major or an English major, good luck trying to get a job with that, because there's not really a demand for English degrees out there or art degrees unless you're specifically in one area or you're that one-off talent. Maybe you can make it, and hey, if you do, great job. But for the majority of people, most of these degrees don't. The facade was they guaranteed you a job, and they just don't anymore. Everybody has a degree, so the mindset with companies is, okay, you got a degree, you can check that box up, but what else you got? Because everybody else who applied has the same degree or better. Maybe they went to a better school, quote unquote, or a more well-known school, and you're trying to compete with that. Now you realize in the job market that this isn't the golden ticket that I thought it was. So I just spent $50,000, and now I'm still trying to find a job, and I have to go work at Chipotle. No disrespect to anybody who works at Chipotle, but if that's not what you plan to do after college, you might just have to take what you got to take. And, you know, what does that mean when you say compounding interest? Because most people probably don't even understand. Well, I thought student loan debt was a set payment. So what does this mean when it gets bigger? So talk about that.
So this is going to be some simple math for you to do. It's called the rule of 72. So this works the same way for investing. Okay, so your student loans compound in interest the same way your investments do in your retirement. So it's the rule of 72. So you take whatever that interest rate is, whatever your interest rate is on your loan, whatever your interest rate is on your investments, and divide 72 by that number. And whatever that number is, that's how many years that balance will double. If you don't. But now it's a little bit slightly different when it comes to the loan because you are paying down. But if you're paying interest only, it's not like so for example, I'm trying to think of like some quick math really quick. So let's say student loans I don't know that too many have a 10% interest rate, but let's, for sake of math, easy math, 72 divided by 10 is 7.2. So if you have a $100,000 student loan, that loan's going to double in 7.2 years unless you pay more than the interest.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And
that's how we've gotten to the point where we're at.
You're right. I think people are so overwhelmed by that number of the student loan debt that you're right. They might be holding out hope that one day the government will just forgive this. So if I don't pay it, then they'll forgive it one day. So I might as well put that money somewhere else, not realizing, but hopefully just looking the other way, like the ostrich and putting their head in the ground, that it's just not something that's going to be there. But Yeah, I mean, it really does affect most people that I know around here because you're right, they just sort of put it to the side. It's not real debt because especially when the government's dangling this whole carrot of we can take care of it one day when there's no real evidence that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And even if some of them take what $10,000, someone's going to pay that somewhere. It's probably going to go back to the taxpayers. So you're going to have to pay it back anyway, just in a different way that you don't see clearly as well.
And really, and I don't want to get into like conspiracy theories or anything like that, but there is part of it too, this whole dangling the carrot that you're saying, that to me is a little insidious, because who benefits on the back end? The government. That's why the only person who can take control of your finances is you. The government is not going to help you out, because the longer they keep people in limbo, they're still going to get their money at the end.
Much like credit card companies with interest, they'll dangle the rewards and everything that you could use it for. And some people who do it right will take full advantage of that. And the credit card companies will say, great, good job. You earned it. Here's your free trips, whatever, without paying interest because you did it the right way. But we know 9 other people out of that 10 are going to do it the wrong way. So we'll make our money on the back end because you did it the right way. And I think that same thing goes for a lot of things in finances, is that we're going to show you what you can get. And people see that, but then if you don't do it right, you don't follow all the terms, eventually that money is going to get paid back tenfold to the people who own that debt, whether the banks, the government, whatever it is. And you're right, we can get into a whole thing about conspiracy theories there. Let's talk about emergency fund. You mentioned that. Let's talk about how how do you start an emergency fund? B, how much should you have in that? And C, how do you know when to use that as opposed to saying, okay, I can pay a little bit of my normal budget every way for this thing? Talk about that for people.
Oh, yeah, those are great questions. So when you're thinking about setting up an emergency fund, the general rule of thumb is you want to aim for 3 to 6 months of your monthly like operating expenses, operating as like your business. But like, what do you spend? What are your bills each month? What does it cost to be you? Not how much money you're bringing in, because some of us live outside of our means, right? Mm-hmm. So how much does it cost each month? And then take that and multiply that by either 3 or 6. So generally, to start, because some people might find that to be a little intimidating, because if your expenses are $5,000 a month, okay, 15 grand is your minimum, quote unquote, minimum of what your emergency fund should be. Well, that's a lot of money. That's more than $1,000. If you were trying to do that in a year, that's more than $1,000 that you're setting aside each month. So that's a lot of money. So I like for people to start small and just build that habit of putting money aside for a purpose. And so a few things that I always make sure people have. So if you are a homeowner and you own a home, make sure you have a home maintenance fund. Okay. Most of us have vehicles unless you live here in the city and you walk everywhere, but always have a vehicle maintenance fund, money that you're setting aside for, new tires.
So these are separate from an emergency fund, or they're all combined in the fund?
So it kind of, at least for me, the way that I structure ours personally, it's all made up of one, and they're just multiple categories. And that's just the way my brain works. But it, in general, is like you want to think about these things that come up in your life, and maybe even just think about the past year, the past 2 years. Okay, what are some of the things that have come up that have been a quote unquote financial emergency that I had to, bust out the credit card for, or maybe I had to deplete my savings for, and then I was never felt like I could get my savings back up to what it was. So what are those things? And start saving for that as a purpose, because when we can assign a purpose to our money, we're less likely to use it for something else. And so that's why I don't like emergency fund. Yeah, that's great. Emergency fund can be anything, really. It really just depends on what you
right.
what you attribute as an emergency. Some of us would say, spilling, wine on my my Louis Vuitton purse as an emergency, and now I need to go and get me a new Louis Vuitton purse. But really, like, let's be real about like what an actual emergency is, okay?
Well, before I forget, let me ask you this, because I hear both sides of this one here. When you say 3 to 6 months of expenses, We're talking about mortgage, gas, groceries, the things you need to live off of that if you lost your job today, you need to pay those. Do you count the going out fund? If I want to go out to dinner and then maybe I go out to dinner once a week, do I count that as part of the emergency fund? And if I lost my job, or do I say this doesn't count anything that I would have ever spent like casually?
So that is a really, really good question. And there's really no wrong answer. If you want your emergency fund to include all that because you don't want your lifestyle to change if you were to lose your job, by all means, like, let's do it. If that's what you want, let's do it. You know, for me, the more money that you save and set aside so you can weather those storms, that's perfect. But I usually just tell my clients, as long as you can set aside enough for you to survive, and that means your four walls, your mortgage, your utilities, your transportation, your food. As long as you can get by and survive until you weather that storm and get yourself a new job and get your salary reinstated, then your emergency fund has done its purpose. So it just depends on how you view it. And that's what's so great about finances. We all think it's got to be this cookie cutter thing,
Yeah.
right? But really, it's our money. We can do whatever the heck we want with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we should be able to do whatever the heck we want with it, you know? And that's why a good solid plan comes into play. So when these things come up, if you choose not to give up that lifestyle when you lose your job and you don't have to, then
That's right. See, I always thought of it as it's there and then you just put it aside in case, like the pandemic, a great example for people that couldn't work anymore. It's like, well, you have 6 months of expenses because this thing happened that no one could have ever predicted would have happened, where everything just shuts down. You have 3 to 6 months. Now, back then, I thought 3 months was good enough. Turns out after the pandemic, it's like actually 6 months, given how everything panned itself out, which is good because now it makes me say I need 6 months of emergency savings just in case this whole thing happened. Now, I was lucky that I didn't have to lose my job because we need cops, so we had to work anyway. But if I was in an industry that said, okay, sorry, the restaurant industry, sorry, everything is shutting down, so we have to lay you off and you're going to get unemployment, which is a couple $100 a week. So hope you have that emergency fund because this is the time to need it. I never necessarily thought of it because when we talk about expenses that come up, as an emergency, just me personally, I sort of know that I'm going to be spending probably a couple $1,000s a year somewhere along the line for car maintenance. I have a motorcycle too, so I just anticipate it's going to happen. I don't know when, but I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to spend about this much total on oil changes, the yearly maintenance, new tires, or I'm going to get a flat tire somewhere. I just sort of plan that in. So for me, I don't necessarily use my emergency fund for that. It's more of just in case something happens, it's there. But for the average person, when should they pull money out of it for? So we talked about what they consider as an emergency. So that part is subjective to what you think an emergency is. But now once you tap into it, how do you pay it back? Or do you? Because now, you have to factor that into your daily budget. So talk about that.
yeah. So I always work with my clients on setting up some type of like money allocation system. And it's usually percentage based. Most of the time it's percentage based, right? So you get your paycheck, okay? 10 to 15% goes into some type of investment, whether it's retirement. Even if you are putting into like a pension or anything like that, if you're doing stuff, if you're doing your investments pre-tax, that's great. But I always say, hey, the more you can have in investments, the better long-term you're going to have. So 10 to 15 to some type of investment, 10 to 15% into savings. Now, if 10 to 15% seems like a lot, start small. If you got to start with 3% and work your way up to 10%, that's fine. But the problem is that the thing is to start somewhere.
Now, is this gross or after taxes?
After taxes.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
whatever your
tax.
take home is. Yes. Because we, when it comes to your savings, you want to go off of, and you could do gross if you wanted to. It's kind of like that, do I include restaurants into my emergency fund or not?
Well, I asked that because of the pre-tax, like 401ks or 457Bs. That's all pre-tax. So now do I include that in the number?
No, I would. If that's already automatic, my strategy for us is like, I pretend like that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm doing what I need to do that I have control over, because we don't have control over our pensions, and we have a little bit of control over like any like deferred comp or like other, you know, investments like that are pre-tax.
Yeah, because some people will say, in this case, government workers, if you have a pension, that takes about maybe 20% of your gross. And then if you do a 457B on top of that and you max it out, that's about 20%. So some people will say, well, that's 40% I'm saving, so I'm good, right? So how do you factor that into the discussion with some of your clients?
So that's kind of like an umbrella. We really don't take a look at that until we get like their current finances cleaned up.
Okay.
And so we get the current finances cleaned up, and then we start saying, okay, this is what projected what you're going to have for retirement, you know, X years down the line. And then how do your current expenses line up with that?
Okay. So after all that's aside, now here's what you bring home. Now let's talk about 10, 15%. Okay. So go with that.
Yes.
Now.
Yes. So now you could do 10, 15% to investments. If you're not ready to go that route yet, that's fine. That's just what I usually recommend. Again, 10 to 15% into savings, and then you're going to be specific about what you're saving for. And so this isn't just emergency fund. If you want to just start with emergency fund, that's fine, but it's also for things like vacation, you know, Christmas, you know, a wedding, if you're saving up to buy a new house. So 10 to 15% to your savings, and then you figure out how to allocate that 10 to 15%. And then and my husband and I actually came up, well, I shouldn't say we came up with this. This is a Robert Kiyosaki rule of thumb that we implemented into the way we manage our money. But he has this thing where it's called pay yourself first. And so basically I always make sure that our investments are funded first, our savings is funded first, and then both my husband and I get some spending money first before we allocate money to our bills. Now, it took us a while to get to that point because we were so focused heavily on paying off debt, and that was just our main focus. But when you do that for so long and you start to feel like you're not enjoying your money, you know, you start making these what I call money SOPs, these little rules of thumb that you have within your relationship dynamic that give you that motivation and that inspiration to manage your money. So 10 to 15% to investments, 10 to 15% to savings, and then anywhere from like 2.5% to 5% to yourself and your spouse or partner, just for spending money that you can do whatever the heck you want with. No questions asked on the other side. If you want to save it up for a large purchase, you can save it up for a large purchase. Otherwise, you just use it at your discretion, however you want to spend it. And then the rest of your money will go to either to fixed expenses, and then essentially your joint fund money or joint now I can't remember what I call it, but basically it's things like memberships, streaming services, things that you could survive without if, you know, something were to happen. And the reason why I do this, I always make sure that when it comes to your fixed expenses, so that's your mortgage or your rent, utilities, food, transportation, child care, if you want to lump child care into that fixed cost expense. Those categories, what it takes for you to survive as a family, I want that to be covered by your base pay. So before any overtime, because that means when that overtime goes away, you can survive on just that base pay.
Now, I know that this is where I think people around here specifically, because of the cost of living, this is where a lot of the pushback comes in, because they might look at that and say, wait a minute, that means if I pay myself 2 to 5%, there's only $600 for me and my wife for the whole month. We can't live on that. Or why am I doing all this work if we can't go enjoy it? That basically means I have to stay at home all day and do nothing. And I can barely, like, we're living almost like in their mind poverty because they're not enjoying their life. And that, you know, this might be easier for places where the cost of living is lower, or maybe you live in an area where it's a more rural area. So what you're used to doing for fun is basically outdoor stuff. So it's less money out of your pocketbook. But I can tell, like, around here, when people see that number, they're probably like, well, then, no, I'm not doing this because that means I can't enjoy my life. Have you had that type of pushback from people where they're saying, that's not a lot of money for me, Rebecca. How am I supposed to do this? And then how do you work with them to say, well, we can bring that up, but that means you're going to have to cut back on A, B, and C, or trade in that car.
Absolutely. And I like I have been, especially with, my dynamic with my husband, is working towards, it's not about whether or not we can or we can't. It's what do we need to do for this to be true? And so that's why taking a look at your finances as a whole and being honest about where the money is going first and foremost, and making that decision on how you want to spend your money. And so I work with the very first activity that I do with my clients in the discovery session is establishing what their values are. So what is it that makes life fun for you? What do you enjoy doing? What just basically makes your heart sing, for a lack of, better terms? I don't want to sound too woo-woo, but really, what gives you that motivation and that feeling of yeah, this is what life is supposed to be like. Okay, so figuring out what are those values, and then looking at, okay, how does my money line up with those values? The way that I'm spending my money, does it line up with what I find to be the most important things in life? So for my husband and I, when we did this activity, so some of our core values was health and wellness, experiences, and family. So those are our 3 values, not necessarily in that order. But so as a family of 4, we probably spend more in groceries than, another family of 4, just because we're focused on health and wellness. And we don't mind spending the extra money there because that is what we find to be important. We'll pay the money for my husband to go play soccer, 3 times a week. We'll pay for me to go to my yoga classes because that's what brings us joy. And so we will make room for that, and we will figure out a way to make sure we have that money coming in. Now, we also recognize that some of those things are luxuries. And so, yeah, he might have to pick up an extra overtime shift occasionally to fund some of those. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But we don't rely on it because we know that if he can't work that overtime, okay, these are the expenses that we're going to cut back temporarily. We're going to have to cut back on these. And again, it's temporarily because things, if we start taking control and actually sitting in the driver's seat of our money, there are so many opportunities that open up because we're not just tied down to a W-2 job. You can pick, especially with law enforcement, it's great because right now the abundance of overtime is, we were just having that conversation with my husband. It's sometimes it feels like you can write your own check because the overtime is there. They always need somebody. And so if you need that extra cash, you can pick up an extra shift. Now there is a trade-off for that because you lose time with your family. You lose time, that decompression time that is so important for this field. But there's always an option B. We just have to start talking about what that might be.
One of the things I've noticed with it is, and it's almost like a come to Jesus moment, is that people realize I got in way over my head and I didn't know about the mortgage and the car adding up the way it is. I just knew I wanted that and I wanted the kids. And now all these expenses are almost so much that if I were to break it down, there's just no way for the numbers to add up without maybe, my significant other taking on more work, or me working more overtime, or trading in the car for something cheaper, or potentially downsizing the home. I mean, these are hard decisions that people are kind of sort of faced with, to say, is it worth it to do all that? Or am I just going to be stuck with the debt and then I just got to go for it? I made my bed, I got to sleep in it, and it is what it is. Do you see that sort of defeatism in people's voices when they're coming to you and you're giving them this breakdown and they're just like, it doesn't really work for me? Do you get that?
Yes. I think I do. I get ghosted a lot sometimes. And, I do my attempts to follow up after kind of that come to Jesus moment. And 'cause it is hard. There's no way about it. Because unfortunately we don't have a schooling system, and even in my degree is in financial management. Not once did I have to take a personal finance course.
Man, yeah.
Let that sink in.
That's like doctors when they go to medical school.
Your financial advisors not necessarily took a personal finance course. Personal finances are a beast. And the reason is because most of it has to do with our behaviors and our mindset around it. And one of the biggest eye-openers for me was realizing that a lot of my limiting beliefs around money stemmed from how money was talked about in the home when I grew up. And my family is probably lower middle class, I would say. They did an amazing job. We had a house, we had Christmases, all of that. But I do remember the only conversations I ever remember about money in my household was when there wasn't enough. And when you grow up as a child and that's all that you hear, that's what you're going to believe when you're an adult too. So we have to start really taking a look at what's the truth. The truth is whatever we want it to be.
Yeah. And I think it's also important for people to understand that it's very, very difficult for you to have everything that you want. If you want to do that, it's going to come at a huge cost somewhere, usually in terms of spending time with the family, because that might mean I got to work 20 hours of overtime a week just to pay these bills. But then the cost with that is I don't see the wife enough or the kids enough, which can lead to its own set of problems, because when people don't see each other enough, people get lonely, and then that leads to a whole another way over there, because then you're sitting over here saying, I had to work this much to go pay for all the bills, and this is the thanks I get. And, people, I don't want to say I get criticized for this, but I get a lot of people asking me, why do I not want to have children? And besides the fact that I'm the youngest child and there's no other kids in my age range in my own family, so I don't know that whole dynamic the way that some people do, I'm like, dude, trying to live here in the Bay Area, I see how much it's going to cost. And I see the reality of how much I'd have to work and how much I wouldn't see my kids the same way that I think that you think that you're supposed to, because you watch all these movies, or the way that it was back in the day. And it's not that I wouldn't enjoy them, but to be able to afford them with the life that I want to live, it's okay, I have to make a choice somewhere. And that's the choice that I personally said that I'm going to make. As tough as it is to think about when you're 70 or 80 and there's nobody there. I mean, I have a nephew, so at least I have him. But the reality is, when you think that far ahead, it's difficult, but I have to plan for enjoying my life the way that I want to live it. That's why it's so important for me with that, because I have the funds to invest in all these other, maxing out the 457B. So it's going to be a pretty hefty sum when I'm finally going to get ready to retire, plus the pension, even though I'm not counting on that, because you don't know how these things are going to work out down the line. But I have to take control of that for myself. And the sacrifice that I've made is two. One, that I don't want to own a home here in the Bay Area because it's not financially worth it for me. And then two, I'm just not going to have kids while I'm here. Now, could that change if I somehow move to Nevada or Oregon or somewhere else and the dynamics change? I could reevaluate then. But for right now, to live the life that I have here and enjoy the salary that I have so I don't have to work all the overtime, which leads to its own health problems, these are the choices that I've had to make. And sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I tell people that and they sort of get it, okay, yeah, it's to have everything, this is what it's going to come at a cost of. And if I do want all that stuff there, I'm going to have these hard choices with the financial planner who's like, you know what? You can't afford the life that you live unless you do this. And if people aren't ready to make that sacrifice, it's going to cause problems down the line. And you just keep kicking the can down the road until you finally address these things. And one of the big ones I want to ask you personally for you guys is, did this conversation about money come up before you had children?
Yes and no.
How did you work?
Not in the way that it probably should have.
Well, how did you work through that?
So this is a story that I had alluded to in the beginning. So before my husband and I got married, we decided that we were going to do a prenup, and which I know for a lot of people is very controversial. But for us, it made sense. We were coming into our marriage, and later than when I think a lot of people get married. In our mid-30s, and we both made the decision at the time that we loved and respected each other enough to know that if something were to go south, in that moment, we wanted to make the decision that we didn't want there to be a situation where we tore each other apart. And so, but with this conversation on the prenup, that means everything has to be put on the table, right? Everything. So that means all the debt that I had brought into the relationship that I had never talked to him about. And it was the hardest conversation I think I have ever had with a human being. And because I carried so much shame, because I knew growing up, my parents countless times, got on me about, accumulating debt, and you need to do this and you need to do that. But the truth of the matter is I knew what I should do, but it didn't line up with the way I was feeling. And that's where I think a lot of people get tripped up, is money is emotional. It is tied to our emotions so much. And until you can recognize that, you're not going to gain control of it. And so, I was young and in my 20s, I racked up the credit cards. I had some student loans. Fortunately, my student loans were pretty minimal. I did kind of like, which is I tried to cash flow as much, but I had some loans. And so I came in and we had to have that conversation. And, he had a little bit. I think he had like one or two student loans, like small, like $1,200. Like it was very minimal what he had.
Was this the first time you guys actually talked about the debt?
Yes. And then I had to come out and say, well, I have 13 grand in credit cards and student loans. And so it was kind of like one of those, like I had that almost out of body experience where I'm like, oh my God, is he going to take this ring back right now? Like, it's like, there's no way he is going to be okay with this. And, and I can tell he had concerns. But he was just like, you know what, we're going to figure out how to fix this together. Now, him and I did way more damage in our relationship than I did, what I brought in. But, the truth of the matter is those money conversations are hard. And again, it goes back to the fact that money is emotional. And a lot of us carry around shame when it comes to money, especially if we carry around debt. When we're carrying around that shame, we try to bury it and pretend like it doesn't exist. But that debt's not going anywhere. So as soon as you can look yourself in the mirror and just say, hey, I did this. Now it's time to clean it up.
Wow. That's going to segue into the next thing I want to talk about. Before I get there, really fast about the whole kids conversation. So you guys knew going into it, here's the debt that we have. This is what we project it's going to cost us to have kids. They do the whole kids cost you this much over the whole lifetime thing. And with what you guys had, did you say, okay, this is how much we're going to have to work, or how much he has to work, whatever it is, because he can do the overtime? Was that set in stone, saying, okay, now we know what to expect in the next few years going forward as these kids come along, and we're going to be okay with it because we know what comes with it?
No, we didn't have any of that planned out at that time. The first one wasn't even planned out.
There we go.
The first kid was not planned out. No, she was a honeymoon baby. So, but yeah. But and it's hard because when we first got married, we weren't, aside from that initial, me being honest about my debt, like we didn't have any other money conversations. In fact, we were very much like kind of split in the way we did things. It's like, because, before we got married, we didn't have a joint checking account. And so it's like, I paid for these bills and then he paid for these bills. And then like everything was separate. And then, everything came together once we got married. But at that time, we still didn't really have a clue on how to manage our money. We were still just, I think, going with the flow. Like I think most people do, is like, this is just how you do it.
When you have these conversations in relationships where, hey, we're about to get married, just so you know, I have this much in debt. And if that's the first time that a lot of dudes are hearing, it's like, whoa, especially if that number is 6 figures or more, it's like, wait a minute. How did you get all this debt? Because if we get married, I own this too. So this is what does this say about, how you pay out bills and your responsibility, whatever? All these questions start coming to our head because we just tend to think about it differently. But for women specifically, especially millennial women, talk about some of the things that a lot of single women around here think they have to pay for or feel that they need to pay for. The beauty industry, getting your hair done, the perception of student loans, enjoying life. I heard that so much when I was in college. Not so much now, but when I was in college, you heard a lot of girls saying that I need to go find myself. I need to go travel the world. I need to go do all these things. And in Instagram, you see some of these profiles of these young women going on all these trips, and like, I know you. I know what you do for a living. You don't make that much to pay for that. So unless you're doing something else on the side that's paying for it, are you just accruing a bunch of debt and then saying, okay, I'll figure it out later? So can you speak specifically to how maybe a young woman's mind thinks about money and how we can help them plan for getting out of that in the future?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's hard because I was that girl in my 20s blowing money on clothes and makeup and nails and hair and all that. And there is an element for women where we do these things to make ourselves feel better. And I think it's even more so nowadays because of social media. One thing is to keep in mind that people say it all the time, but I don't know that it really resonates. What you see on social media is not real.
Yeah, that's not going to resonate with them.
I know, and it's so true. It's not real. It's, especially nowadays with AI, you don't even know if it's a real person.
That's
right.
Scary. Yeah.
And so you just have to get to the root of what it is that you want. And I think that's why the coaching industry in general, life coaches, wellness coaches, financial coaches like me, that's why those jobs and those businesses have boomed the past couple years, is because that's kind of what we need as individuals to figure this stuff out. Because we have so much coming at us from every direction. This is what you should wear. This is what you should look like. This is who you should hang out with. These are the places you should go, the jobs you should have. So everybody is telling us what our life should look like. And it's really hard for us to figure out what it is that we really want.
So for your female clients, like, do you have these conversations with them where they tell you, hey, this is how much I spent on makeup and hair and clothes and whatever? You as a financial person are saying you got to cut back on that in your mind, but you can't say that directly because maybe they won't resonate, or because the woman feels she has this pressure to be a certain image. Maybe it is her job. Maybe she works at a bank or something where she thinks she's got to look a certain way, whatever it is. And all that stuff costs so much money, and maybe the income coming in doesn't really match up to it, and then they're just carrying on debt. So how do you have that type of conversation with someone who's asking you that?
Yeah, so for me, I just have to ask a lot of qualifying and thought-provoking questions to try to get to the root of why it is they feel they need all of that. Now, if it's something that you want because it makes you feel good, and and because there is an element of that where, as a professional, it's like, for example, if I were to roll up in here today in my sweats, my hair up in a messy bun, I probably wouldn't be delivering the information that I'm giving you right now the same way that I am in what I'm wearing and how I've done my hair today. That's just the truth, because our outward appearance impacts our confidence. How we present to the world impacts our confidence. So there is that piece is important. We just have to realize that taking care of ourselves, that's the important thing. The name brands and all of that facade that we project, you have to be very careful about how much of that is for you and how much of that is for other people. It's so funny because one of our friends, they own an auto body shop, and they've been in business for years, very successful. And I remember him telling me, he's like, oh yeah, he bought this very expensive truck. Okay. And then he's like, and I don't remember how long he had, if it was like for a month or something like that. But he was like, I realized one day, he's like, I don't see myself in this truck. Everybody else sees me in it, but I don't see myself in this truck. So is this truck really for me? Or is it for what everybody else sees? And so he actually traded in his truck because he was like, I don't even.
Oh, good job.
You know what I mean? But it's true. But we think sometimes there are things where we think this is for me so I can feel good. okay, so but what is it that you are trying to feel good for? Or what is it that's really making you feel good? Is it making you feel good that this person is now like envying you? So it's really kind of a deep conversation to get into, because it's kind of, and it's very, I don't want to say it's very calculated, but you almost have to make somebody realize that, hey, number one, you are enough as you are, and the only thing that matters is how you want to live your life. And there are consequences to spending hundreds of dollars each paycheck on beauty items. What's the consequence to that? Well, I go into debt, or I can't afford my utilities, or, I might run out of gas and I can't afford gas. So there are consequences to that. So we have to really talk about what is important and focus on that. What are the end goals? What are you trying to achieve? Because that's what our money is there to do. It is a tool for us to use to achieve the life that we want.
Well, this also speaks to just how society views this, because in San Francisco, the perception from what I see out there is that there's a lot of single women out here, and they're career oriented. They've taking care of their body, all that good stuff. But in the way that society works, there is that pressure to outcompete others. Men compete a lot in the business world. I got to outdo you to make more money. And I see a lot of women competing on how they look. I have to look better than her. Of course, I can't relate to that because I don't care if I look better than the other dude. It doesn't matter to me. But with women, I can see that a lot in the single thing. If she got her hair done here, I have to go to the hairstylist who does it better than her and pay double that. Whatever it is, there's just sort of this one-upping thing. And in an area where there's a lot of single women who are career oriented that are still spending a lot of money on this, if it costs me $500 every 2 months to get my hair colored, then I just got to do it. And that's the way it is. And then maybe if I find somebody down the line, I'll wait till the last minute to tell them how much debt I've accrued because I don't know how I'm going to pay for it. And one person told me this. It's like, I almost kind of hope that I find the right guy who will just take care of it for me. I don't know if that's something that's ever talked about amongst female circles, that I just kind of wish in the back of my mind that this would actually happen, and I'll just he'll take care of it for me. But in the meantime, I'm just going to spend what I have to spend because I need to feel good in a certain way.
It's possible you could find somebody. But I also know that oftentimes with that, there's going to be other, there's going to be trade-offs to that, right? Because usually if somebody can come along and do that, you're probably not getting quality time with them. And that's just the truth. So there is a trade-off there. I just wish that, and I'm actually, can you cuss on your podcast?
That's fine.
Okay. And then it's nothing bad, but I just picked up this book that I started reading today, and it's called Get Rich, Lucky Bitch. And I can't remember the author's name because I just picked it up. But the whole point of it is really empowering women to take control of their money. Because for whatever reason, I don't know if it's societal, it's a confidence thing. We don't feel like we're worthy. It's just easier for somebody else to do it for us. But the truth is like we are going out there, and there are more women in the workforce now than ever. And doing that also comes with the responsibility of managing your money responsibly and in a way that allows you to live the best part of your life. It is empowering. It's empowering to take control of your money, because that means that no man can come and take that away from you. They can't take that skill away from you. Again, we go back to the divorce rate, right? It's close to 50%, maybe a little over 50%. So most relationships, there's a 50-50 chance that it's going to last. You still need to have those skills. I've had women come to me who have never touched the finances in their relationship, and their relationship is on the way out, and they have no idea what they're going to do because he managed everything. And the funny thing is those women who are walking around in their high heels and their purse and their outfit and their beautiful hair and their glam makeup and everything won't let no man tell them what to do. Yeah. So don't let him tell you what to do with your money. Take control of that.
You know, this is a thing in modern couples, and you just touched on it right now, is I'm more of a traditionalist in that what my wife makes, that's her money. What I make is our money in this respect. It's our money in terms of I prefer to pay for the living expenses, rent, the groceries, insurance payments, things like that. To me, that empowers her to be able to make as much money as she feels she needs without having. The way I like to see it is I don't want her to have to work to pay for some of the bills. You can work as much as you want because you want to work and you want to buy the thing. You want to buy a Gucci bag. She doesn't, but if you did, hey, that's your money. I'm not buying you no expensive bag. I take care of the living expenses. That makes me, I'm going to say the word feel, but it makes me feel like that's my purpose. I feel good doing that. I enjoy doing that. Now, I don't get walked over. If you tell me you want me to buy you something crazy, it's not going to happen. I'm buying what I need to buy for the household. But for some people, and some people don't think that way. And especially in today's day and age where you have to have dual income, you don't get that option. You both have to work because you both have to put together the money to pay for that mortgage, to pay for the kids and pay for everything. And again, one of the reasons why I've made that decision in my life not to have kids or not to have a house here is because it puts us in a position where she could work as much as she wants and doesn't have to work. And I can work without having to work any overtime. I make enough money to take care of all the bills. So that puts us in a better financial position where I can spend more time going to the gym and enjoying life. But for her, somebody asked me an interesting question is, how do women in those type of relationships still plan for their futures so that in case, not that it would ever happen, but in case their man left them and he did everything with finances, how do they make sure that they've saved up enough money and can manage their own finances? So in case maybe he passes on, you hear those stories all the time of the woman who lost her husband at 50 years and she doesn't know how to do anything because he did everything. So do you have any tips for women in that situation to be able to say, even though he may be paying for a bulk of the joint finances, how do I make sure that I'm putting money away for my own investment, retirement, whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. And even for stay-at-home moms, right? This still applies to stay-at-home moms too.
That's the toughest job ever. People don't give enough credit.
Oh my gosh. I work from home. Fortunately, we still pay for my husband's parents and my parents kind of tag team watching our kids for us so I can work from home. I could not be a stay-at-home mom. It is so hard. It is so hard. No. I love being able to work from home and then take care of the kids at night. But sorry, I got sidetracked. What was the question again?
So for women, whether they're in relationships or they're single on their own, how do they still manage to be able to manage their own finances if they have somebody else taking care of the majority of the living expenses?
Yes. So there still needs to be that collaboration as a couple. Is both members of the partnership, the marriage, need to understand what's going on with the finances. It doesn't mean they have to actively participate in it, but they need to know how are the bills being paid, how much is going into savings each month, or what is in savings and what is it for. Also, I don't know what type of job that your wife has, if it has a pension or
she's a business owner. She owns her own hair salon.
Oh, okay, perfect. So there are great, my husband and I are actually looking into this too, there's great investment retirement packages for small business owners. And so it's taking advantage of those because, for me, when I left my full-time job and I transitioned my pension to an IRA, and then, but for the IRA, you can only put in, I think, $7,000, or this year, 2024, $7,000 a year. That's not much.
Well, she's got a SEP, so because she's a small business owner, she has that.
And that's exactly what I was going to say is understanding those types of investment tools that are out there. The SEP IRA, which allows you to invest just like, an employer sponsored 401k. I don't know if it's like 26 or 27, something like that a year.
It's 23 now.
Is it 23? Okay.
22,000.
So it's much more than you would get with just your personal IRA. So it's definitely, you need to be putting into some type of retirement investment, and just understand the basics of personal finances. What does it mean to have a budget or a spending plan? What bills do we have? And how much do our total bills cost each month? There is a really cool, I guess you would call it like a software program, but it's called Legal Shield.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is it's a program that allows you to put all of your important documents into one little, like, quote unquote, vault secured. It's all digital and everything, but vault secured location. And so in the event that if something were to happen to the person who manages the finances, then the surviving spouse only has to know one login and password to get access to all of that information. And so it's really important to keep that in mind. And then talking about, surviving spouse, is you need to have adequate life insurance. Even for stay-at-home moms. If you're a stay-at-home mom, you should have life insurance, because there is a cost associated to what you do in the house. There is value. If something were to happen to the stay-at-home mom, the surviving working spouse would have to pay for childcare. They'd probably have to pay for somebody to come and clean up the house, until they got into a relationship and resumed whatever dynamic they have. But there is going to be a cost associated to that, and there is a void that needs to be filled. And so nobody likes to talk about life insurance. It's very just like stress-inducing itself to talk about.
And if you get the wrong one, like I had a financial planner here, he's like, if you get the wrong one, it is the worst investment. So you have to really know what you're getting into with life insurance.
Yes. Yeah. That's why I always recommend a term life insurance. The whole life insurance, I would only recommend that to like more sophisticated, like financial, I don't want to say financial planners, but if you're in a different, like, whole life is expensive and it serves its purpose, but not necessarily as a life insurance policy, even though it is called whole life.
Yeah.
But that's just my opinion. But so definitely term life. But yeah, so both parties should have. And then the rule of thumb with life insurance is 10 times your annual income. Whatever your annual income is, multiply that by 10. That's what your policy should be.
This has been a lot of good information. We can keep going on and on about finances. One thing I wanted to end with was this that we talked about. I've seen this theme, and the reason why I know this is because it happened to me. One of the guests I had on, we went to college together, probably about the year after we graduated. He's in personal finances, financial planner. So he's got all that certification and whatnot. He asked me to have lunch with him, and I did, just catching up. And he told me about what he was doing, the whole financial planner thing. So he explained to me why it's good for me to invest in certain things and how he could help me out. And I knew he was telling me the truth. And he showed me the numbers here. Here's what you make. Here's what you could save, and here's what you can invest in, the whole shebang. And I think I told him later on, but I said, I'll get back to you, because didn't have the mindset. This is like, 23 or 24 years old. Didn't have the balls, if you will, to tell him, dude, I can barely make rent. Like, I just got moved out of my parents' house on my own. I thought I had my expenses lined up, and it turns out all these things came up that I never knew existed. And I'm struggling to pay that. So I don't have the money to even put into these retirement accounts that you're telling me about. And I said I'd get back to him. And years later, and it took me a while to actually say, hey, let's have a conversation about that, because I wasn't ready for the longest time. But it was embarrassing to tell him, dude, I don't have the money for this. I know what you're telling me is true. Yes, I see it. The numbers would work out great for me, but I don't even have the money to put into that. And it's the same thing with a lot of people now when it comes to money. People know that they have to pay down. They should pay down debt. People know that they have to save money, and it's a smart thing to invest in retirement accounts. But the elephant in the room always is, for most of them, they just don't have the ability to do it, because we're in so much over our head that until we hit rock bottom, or we lose our job, whatever, we say, now I have to do something about it. And I have to make some really tough choices about how I live my life or how we live our life and get rid of certain big expenses. Okay, now I'm ready to do it. Now I'm ready to, fall into the sword and do what I got to do. But until someone hits that rock bottom point, it's very hard to get people to understand what they have to do. Just taking that first step is it's so daunting for people, because it comes back to admitting, yeah, I probably screwed up several times with my finances, and I don't want to admit it because nobody wants to admit that they're wrong. And I have to do that first before I say, okay, now how do I break everything down? And it's the same thing with personal trainers that I have on the show. They tell me the same exact thing. They'll have people come in January 1 for the gym, and then they don't see them again. And it's not until that person hits rock bottom, whatever that looks like for them, where they say, okay, I'm ready to do the hard work. And I went to the doctor, and then they told me I got 6 months to whatever it is. I need to work on myself now. And they said, okay, let's get to doing it. I just hope the information that we gave out today, people can really take and say, you know what, before I hit that point, I need to start thinking about how I can reduce my expenses and start living a life that I actually want to live, so that I don't have to be dependent upon working overtime, and I don't have to be dependent on credit cards, and I don't have to be dependent on my parents, whatever it is. And do I really need all these things that society tells me I'm supposed to have because I make this much money, or I live here, or my family members are all having kids, so I'm supposed to do the same thing? It's a really tough thing. So
it is absolutely tough. And again, I think I said this before, it is one of the hardest conversations and one of the hardest truths that a majority of us have to face. Now, here's the thing is, a majority of people are experiencing this. So you're not alone if you're feeling that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it goes back to the whole, not believing what you see on Instagram. It's like, we see what other people want us to see. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And so we think that we're all alone in this. But, and it's really, it's a failing of our education system. We are preparing our kids to go out and be worker bees, but we're not preparing them to survive and do what it takes to make sure that they are successful long term, and it's hard because I don't know that there's any one thing that I can do or say to just kind of like get people to wake up and be like, you can do it. It's not, it's hard, but you know what's harder? Being in the same place a year from now, or even a worse off place. If you're not paying off your debt as quickly as you should be, you might even if you don't put a single thing on your credit cards, if you're only paying the minimums over the next year, you're probably going to still have more debt next year than you do right now. So it's just, you just have to take that first step. You have to reach the point where enough is enough. And if you've reached that point, I'd love to see what I can do to help.
Remind people again exactly how you can help them out, and then tell us where can they find you.
Yes, so you can reach out to me by email, Rebecca@priority1fc.com. I'm also on Instagram @BlueLineMoneyCoach. While I do market myself to law enforcement, I have clients that are non-first responder as well. So I help anybody. I don't judge. If you need my help and you're willing to work with me, like I'm here.
So remind us again, they contact you and you give a consultation.
Yeah. So what I do, if you go to my Instagram, or even if you email me, I'll send you a link to my free 30-minute consultation, and you just sign up and get on my calendar, and we go from there.
Great. And then how long do you typically work with clients for? 6 months, a year, indefinite?
Yeah, so as long as they need me, if they continue to say that they need me, I always offer, my first session is that 2-hour deep dive discovery session. And then after that, I have a 6-month program. I've got a 12-month program. If they need me, past that, I'm whatever it is that, however I can help the client get to the point in their finances where they feel confident and are able to take control of themselves, I'll be there along the way.
Great. And I'll put the links to everything in the description for both Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. So if anybody is interested, you can click on that link. And then what's your Instagram handle again?
Is @BlueLineMoneyCoach.
@BlueLineMoneyCoach. So I'll put that in the description as well. Thank you, Rebecca, for coming out. This was an awesome episode. I love talking about money and all the things that people don't realize that come into finances, just your life choices and what you want in life, how much of an impact it is. But it's been great having you on, Rebecca. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you. And to everybody who's out there, if you enjoyed the episode, please like the episode on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and share with anybody that you feel can get value out of this. That is how the channel grows. That is how it gets exposure. All we want to do is to get all this information out there so you can make the best decision for yourself, for your finances, your fitness, and your overall mental health, because people can forget easily how much finances impact your mental health. When you're stressed to the brim on how you're going to pay bills, you think that's going to affect your mental health? It absolutely will. Thank you for enjoying the show, and thank you, Rebecca, for coming on again. Everybody have a good one. Take care.